welcome to the Yacht Talk podcast. Today I'm here at the IYBA offices with Paul Flannery. How are you, Paul?
I'm well, thank you, Miriam. How are you?
Very good.
Good.
So the subject of today is very interesting. Paul is going to share with us, since he is the president of the International Yacht Brokers Association. He knows all about yacht brokers. So he's going to share with us from his experience how yacht brokers really bring value to yacht owners and people looking to buy a yacht, right? So owners to be and owners. Okay, so let's go right into the questions. My first question, Paul. What services can a yacht broker offer to someone buying or selling a yacht?
Well, there are a variety of services that a broker can offer. First and foremost, if you're dealing with a professional yacht broker, what you're going to get is the benefit of his professional experience and expertise. Services per se, probably the one that stands out the most is going to be escrow services. So when you want to give a deposit towards the purchase of a vessel, in the state of Florida, we're licensed and we're required to have a separate escrow account registered with the state of Florida. And your deposit funds, as well as all proceeds from the sale, are deposited into that account. So you can be assured that there's going to be no commingling of funds between operating account and escrow accounts. And at the end of the day, the biggest risk in any transaction is the financial risk, and you want to mitigate those risks. So that's one of the structures that are in place, or one of the services that are in place that a broker can provide to you.
Mm-hmm. Especially with big purchases, right? Like a yacht, you want
typically,
to make sure
it's a 10% deposit. The sellers insist upon a 10% deposit being in the escrow account prior to commencement of any surveys or sea trials. So if you're talking about $1 million boat, that's a $100,000 investment that I wouldn't want to just throw my $100,000 someplace I wasn't sure about it.
No, of course not.
Yeah, so you have to be very careful, and that's the most standout service that a yacht broker provides with regard to security. With regard to abilities, the connections that a yacht broker has, having been in the industry for a period of time, will facilitate your deal by helping you to find the good surveyors that are going to do a thorough and complete job of examining the boat, to help maybe refer you to insurance companies that are accustomed to insuring a yacht, as opposed to going to the guy who handles your house and saying, hey, I've just bought a boat, I need an insurance policy. With regard to financing, marine lending is a very different industry than household lending or business lending. So all of these services are services that a professional yacht broker can bring to you through his experience and through his connections in the industry.
Nice. So next question. How is it different to contact a yacht broker to show you a boat versus looking it up online and going directly with a listing broker?
Well, there are perceived benefits either way. Many people these days, with the advent of the internet, people are far more educated. They're far more informed about the products that they're shopping for. I know when I go to buy a television, or I go to buy an automobile, or even if I go to buy a piece of real estate or an airplane, I research that product, and I'm fairly well informed on it by the time I contact a professional to help me, or by the time I walk into Best Buy or the Ford dealership, or whatever the case may be. So people are informed these days, and what that has done is it has empowered many of the buying public, or much of the buying public, to reach out directly to the listing broker, because their thought is, well, if I go directly to the listing broker, there's only one broker involved and I'm going to be able to save money. The reality of it is, the structure is such that the commission, as paid by the seller, is going to be earned by whomever's in the middle of the transaction anyway. So The benefit of going directly to the listing broker can be that you'll get information direct from the horse's mouth, if you will, about a specific boat. Conversely, and I'll tell you that there are a lot of brokers in the industry that make their living at a higher percentage by being a buyer's representative than being listing broker or a dual agency representative, because they have a broad knowledge of different types of boats, or they specialize in a specific type of market. Let's just say, for example, a fellow's very well versed, or a lady's very well versed in pilot house motor yachts. So the client who's interested in a pilot house motor yacht may go directly to someone who's the listing broker, but that person's going to be focused specifically on that boat, typically. If you go to someone who has a large a breadth of experience in that type of boat, the likelihood is that you're going to get information about more different offerings in the marketplace. So you may get your exposure to a Marlowe and an outer reef and an offshore and a Krogan and a Grand Banks and any number of 5, 6, 7 different brands of boats, and then narrow down your focus as to what's going to meet your particular needs better. And even though a lot of people do research on their own, sometimes they miss a key detail that doesn't seem to be such a big deal. I've had many times that people called me up and said, hey, I'm interested in such and such boat because I want to be able to get from point A to point B quickly. And it's a displacement style vessel. So there are key points that you have to be careful of.
Yes, of course.
So there are two sides of the coin as to whether I want to contact a listing broker directly or I want to have a buyer's representative. It's hard to say exactly.
Okay, I guess it depends on the case, right?
It does. It depends upon the individual situation, the individual buyer, their level of experience, their willingness to do research on their own. There are a great variety of factors that come into play with regard to every single boat deal, with every single transaction.
Yeah, now that you're talking about the willingness to do the research on their own, I imagine some people prefer to call one person that will do all the work and show them the results. People sometimes don't have the time or just don't want to do it. So it's like a more VIP experience if you just call one person, they do all the work and they just show you, right, like the options, and then you move forward with more ease. Time's
one of the most valuable commodities we have, and as I grow older and shorter on it, I come to realize how valuable it is. And there's some situations where I simply am not interested in doing the research. I'd much prefer to just call the expert. Call the person who knows and let them tell me. The challenge is identifying that person who you feel like you can well trust.
Yes.
And that's another topic. But having the time to do the research is difficult because most of the people that are in a position to own a nice boat, they devote a lot of their time to putting themselves in the position to own a nice boat.
Course. Yeah.
And when they do have the free time, they want to be using that boat, or they may be at their mountain home or their ski place or their beach house or whatever the case may be. So, time's a tough one.
Yes.
Time's the tough one.
Definitely. Okay, next question. Which information might yacht brokers have that an individual wouldn't know about a boat that they're looking to buy?
Well, there are lots of different things that a broker may know. I'll just use myself as an example. I spent many years as a sport fishing captain. So I traveled around the Bahamas and the east coast of the United States and the Virgin Islands, and I worked on, ran, and mated on many, many different types of boats. That on-the-job training, that on-the-water experience helped me to develop form an opinion on the characteristics of a lot of different boats. So if I had a fellow call me who wanted a boat who was going to use it for a specific purpose, I would know right away if something that he suggested to me was that he was interested in would be well suited to that task or not. There are some boats that are very well suited to pursuit of big game fish, and they're not well suited to doing some of that end cruising with your family as well, and vice versa. There are some boats that are much better suited to cruising with the family and providing luxurious accommodation, and it really isn't a very good boat for fishing. There are certain areas of the country that enjoy different sea conditions generally. So the Gulf of Mexico tends to have a shorter, steeper chop, whereas the Atlantic waters, although it gets rough and you'll have a nasty chop a lot of times, tends to be a bigger, more rolling sea. And California tends to have a bigger, more rolling sea. So different hull configurations, power considerations, layouts and plans lend themselves better to different types of boating. And most of your brokers are well versed in those nuances. So again, shortcutting the research, or sort of having to go out there and spend 15 or 20 or 30 years of your life gaining the experience, impose upon a person who's done that and learn from them. Let them be your guide.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the benefit.
Okay. Can someone list their yacht for sale by themselves on Yacht World or any yacht sales website? Is it even possible?
Well, on some of them, I saw a funny commercial on television last night for one of the big real estate companies, and a guy and his wife had set up a card table out in the front yard of their house, and they were yelling, "House for sale, house for sale." And it was really evident how fruitless that effort would be. And the same exists in our industry, in the yacht sales industry. You can list your boat for sale by yourself with certain websites. And while I'm sure those get some traction, there's an awful lot of work involved in selling a boat, just like there is in selling any other high dollar commodity. There are many layers to the transaction. There are many nuances to the transaction. And if you want to do it yourself, you're welcome to. But I'm not much for self-diagnosis of my medical conditions. I prefer to go to a professional for that. I'm pretty well versed in real estate. I've bought and sold a lot of houses. I still call a realtor when I want to buy or sell a home, because it's what they're good at. It's what they do. It's what they know well. And I had one of my clients say to me one day, he had bought several boats from me over the years and spent quite a lot of money. And he was joking, but he said, the reality of it is I've spent a pile of money with you, but you have saved me a much larger pile from myself.
Yeah, for example, people who buy a boat and after 6 months realize it's not what they wanted, and then they have to sell it and buy a new one.
Those are called friction costs.
Yeah.
And those friction costs can be substantial.
Yes.
They absolutely can.
Yes, definitely. Okay. And which mistakes could someone make on the purchase or sale of a yacht if they don't have an experienced broker's advice?
They can lose all their money. I say that and I laugh, but there's nothing funny about it at all. One of the challenges that we as professionals face today is wire fraud. The transactional industry, if there's such a thing that you would call, is fraught with peril in regard to fraud. So, there are major divisions of the FBI that's what their job is to investigate wire fraud. And I can tell you of experiences personally before I stopped my yacht brokerage career and took over the position with IYBA. One of the very last transactions that I was involved with, unfortunately, someone had been laying in wait after having gained access to some email chains, and they waited and found the opportune time, and they pirated wire transfer instructions and all of the logos and structure of the email format and everything, and inserted a different set of wire transfer instructions, and it was kind of a comedy of errors that all lined up at one time. But long and short of it was the seller's proceeds were sent to the wrong place. And by looking at it, you would think that everything was in order because they were so careful in how they had structured it. And this is a transaction that's done. This one particular company does 60, 80 transactions a year. No, probably more than that. Probably 100 to 150 transactions a year. They do a lot of business, and they're very accustomed to this. And nothing looked out of order, and they pushed the button, and the money went, and the money wasn't received, and the money wasn't received. And fortunately, the alarm bells went off pretty quickly because everyone was in contact with one another. As it turned out, I find it quite miraculous, but they recovered about 96% of the money that was stolen.
Wow.
And my view on that was, I was amazed, because to me, if a guy is savvy enough to steal that kind of money, he'd be savvy enough to hide it.
Yeah.
and apparently, I don't know, the guy went back out to the beach and ordered a Mai Tai and sat there on his beach towel thinking, I got a bunch of money in the bank account. And we chased through the banks and we found out where the money had gone, and we put a stop on it, and it was returned.
Wow.
I don't know whether there was ever any prosecution against the perpetrator or not. I really don't know. I felt that we were extremely fortunate in that regard.
Yes.
But there have been some very, very, very large sums of money stolen, and this is from people that do it professionally. So something to be very, very careful of.
Yeah, I remember talking to a yacht financing expert, and she mentioned this, like how it's so important to make a call right after and always follow up on the phone, not just by email, to make sure everything is safe, you know, and they have all these structures in place to prevent this from happening.
You've seen quite a significant change in our industry over the course of, I'd say, the last 12 to 18 months in the modality that people employ to do their movement of money. And there's much more verbal verification and direct contact as opposed to electronic contact with one another. The manner in which the money moves may still be electronic, but the verifications are with a human voice to, hey Joe, hi Bob, or hey Mary, hi Sally. You know, we know who we're talking to, we know what we're doing before we push that send button.
Yes. Wow. So that's one big thing that a professional yacht broker can prevent from happening when someone is buying or selling.
It's not 100% foolproof, but you've got a far better chance of things going properly than if you try to take matters into your own hands.
So that's one thing, but what about like preventing a mistake, for example, in the price that someone puts on their boat for sale, or making a mistake on the boat that you chose that you didn't know, right? Like,
how about the transactional paperwork that has to be done properly? And if two neighbors decide to do the transaction and one guy hands a check across the fence and the other guy hands the keys back the other way, possession is 9/10 of the law, they say.
Yeah.
But hopefully you'll never be challenged on that. And the bigger the boat, the more intricate the transactional details, the registries of the vessels, the transfer of ownership. When does a closing actually take place? Well, from afar, a closing takes place, on the 17th of March or the 22nd of June. Well, okay, but at what point in time is the actual transaction closed and the ownership transferred? And most, very importantly in that is, when do the liabilities for one party stop and the liabilities for another party start? Is it because my contract says such and such a day at 3 p.m.? Or is it when clear funds are received into the seller's account? Or is it when funds are received into the seller's representative's account? Or is it when the keys land on the desk in front of the buyer? that must be defined. And those sorts of particular details are clearly defined when you have professional representation, and you no longer have challenges. You've ironed out a lot of the wrinkles and potential challenges in a deal when you have professionals assigning each task in each step of the way.
Yes. And now that you're talking about this, I'm thinking about also the negotiation process. Many times having a broker, helps because they talk to one side and to the other instead of the buyer and the seller talking to themselves.
Theoretically, there's less emotion involved.
Yes.
And when you can take the emotion out of a business transaction, it usually goes more smoothly.
Yes.
And in theory, that's one of the things that happens when you have a broker or two brokers engaged in the process for you. When you have a buyer's representative engaged to represent you as a buyer, and there is a seller's representative engaged to represent the seller, then you have two intermediate parties that can ensure that each other party is being well represented. Now, it's not to say that one individual can't act well as a dual transaction broker. I've been in the middle of selling my own listings many times. And what I always told people is my job is to make a marriage. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tell you, Mr. Buyer, that the seller would take less, and I'm not going to tell you, Mr. Seller, that the buyer would pay more. I'm simply going to be the messenger, and I will convey all offers with enthusiasm. So that's how I would position myself in a role of a dual transactional broker. But when you have someone on either side of the deal, then you've got them representing the individual interests of that party, and you've got two sets of eyes on all of the milestones along the way, making sure that everything is done properly.
Yes.
When does the insurance become effective? Did we get insurance in time? Do we have caveats in our contract that says, you know what, it's September 15th, we're scheduled to close, and there's a Category 4 hurricane, and we're in the cone of the cone of uncertainty, or the cone of silence, or whatever, I forget what the cone is that they call it. We're in the danger zone, and the insurance companies aren't writing policies. But the contract says that we're supposed to close on such and such a day, and I can't put insurance in place, so am I obligated to buy the boat? Well, if you're using the contracts that the International Yacht Brokers Association offers to their members to use, there are addendums, there are caveats in place to protect you from that. Force majeure, strike, war, lockouts, any number of different things that may present problems in a deal that you want a structure in place to address, just like in any other significant transaction you may be involved in.
Yeah, to be protected.
It's very important.
Okay, next question. How do I know that a broker is really looking for my best interest when helping me choose the yacht that I'm going to buy?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. How do you really know that you can trust anyone in your life? Through experience and through your spidey senses, or through listening to that little voice inside. And many of us could spend more time listening to that little voice, I think. I'm pleased to say that the overwhelming percentage of my experience in the industry was with people that are of a high moral fiber, of a great deal of integrity. And I can only use the state of Florida as an example because it's where I reside, it's where I do business. I am knowledgeable about other parts of the world, but here in particular, the law stipulates that if you engage in a transaction with expectation of compensation on a vessel in excess of 32 feet and under 300 tons, you are required to be licensed in the state of Florida under Chapter 326 of the Yacht Shipbrokers Act. So we have a very specific set of rules that we must follow. Um, that's a start. Just like you would always want to, or I would think you would always want to use a board certified lawyer, or you would want to use a board certified surgeon, not, you know, not some guy in an alley that, oh yeah, I can amputate your arm, no problem. The bleeding will stop in a few days. You always want to look for some credentials. The licensing in the state of Florida is the one that actually we as an association very early during our inception, we lobbied the state of Florida to impose regulations on the industry in order to establish a set of rules and order in the industry. There's been a lot of history with sundowning of the law that regulates our industry and us lobbying with our legislature to bring the law back up and make sure it stays current. There is a significant opinion right now that it's time to review some of the structure and some of the way the law is. So we've impaneled a group at our association here to review the law and approach our legislators in Tallahassee with recommendations to, frankly, put more teeth in the law, which is interesting that an industry would request further regulation. But it's not necessarily more, it's just smarter regulation. And the thing that you have to realize is business is evolving. The Yacht and Shipbrokers Act first went into place in 1987, and in 2019, the yacht sales industry is a much different place than it was all that time ago. Transactions are significantly larger. The world is significantly smaller. The movement of goods, while yachts are a very mobile commodity anyway, the movement is much greater. We have companies that devote their entire purpose to transporting yachts around the globe. So, you know, there's a lot involved in the yacht brokerage industry these days, and some of our sections in the chapter that regulates us, it's time to be reviewed. So.
And could you give examples of what kind of rules or regulations are you reviewing?
Well, one of the things that we'd like to do is to ensure an added level of professionalism. So while today there are checks and balances that the state has in place before they will grant a license, we're going to make some suggestions to them that raises the bar a little bit. Not a little bit, but a lot. The decision, the recommendation has not been completely vetted, but the likelihood is that we'll be looking at doing some testing. You know, there are very few licensed industries that don't require testing. And while most of the people involved in our industry are not dilettantes, they're people that have quite a good level of experience and could probably sit down and pass any reasonable test. We'd like to make sure that there's just more insurance. You know, it's all about consumer protection. It really is. That was the purpose of putting the law in place, was to protect the consumer from, you know, that rogue guy running off with your money. And it had happened, and what happens is a small percentage of people give the vast majority a bad name when things like that happen. So you've got to do something to change that. You've got to do something to fix that.
Yes, yes, I agree.
So, as with everything, our industry is evolving, so we feel like it's important to review the regulations that control our industry and let them evolve as well.
Very good.
Hopefully.
That's good to know that you guys are working on it. Very
We
cool.
have a lot of agenda items as an association. We do quite a lot to try to raise the level of professionalism and cooperation amongst the yacht sales industry. That's our mantra. That's our mission statement. We also do what we are able to help remove barriers to commerce. In 2010, we were fortunate enough to convince the state legislature that it would be a good idea to put a cap on the sales tax liability for yacht purchases in the state of Florida. And many people viewed that, including many editorial writers in newspapers, as a tax break for the rich. Or, those guys with the big white shiny toys, the last thing they need is another break. When the fact of the matter is, that was a jobs bill. That was not a tax break for the rich. And what it did is it created jobs in the state of Florida. In the state of Florida, my most recent figures show a $23.3 billion annual economic impact. And that's second only to tourism in the state of Florida. It's very, very big. Throughout the United States, it's $173 billion recreational boating.
Wow.
173 billion, 9 zeros.
Wow.
Economic impact on the national economy. That creates lots and lots of jobs.
Yeah.
And when you impose a tax cap on the transaction, what it does is it encourages the person who buys the boat to keep the boat in this state instead of seeking alternative forms of registry and taking it elsewhere. The reason that that's important is through the studies that we did, we've learned that the average boat purchaser spends 13% of the value of that vessel within the first year of his purchase and continues to spend 10% a year every year thereafter of the value of the vessel. So if a person buys a $100,000 boat, they're going to spend $13,000 in improvements and upgrades in the first year on top of the 10% that it costs them to own it. So that's $23,000 economic impact into the local community. Extrapolate that number out to $1 million boat, which there are a lot of these days, or a $10 million boat, and you're adding commas and zeros.
Yes.
So when Steven Spielberg brings his yacht to Fort Lauderdale, the value of that boat is in excess of $180 million. Wow. You can pretty quickly see that $1.5 million a month is injected into the economy of Broward County by virtue of that boat tied up to the end of the dock at Pier 66.
Amazing.
So it's an important consideration, and a lot of times legislators don't understand that. They need to be educated on it, just like they need to be educated on the workings of the nail salon business or the auto repair business or whatever business it is that they've never been involved with but do have an economic impact on their community and on their state. So.
Nice. And also I was thinking about the flag, right? If someone has an American flag, they have to hire American crew.
They have to hire an American captain, absolutely. I'm not a crew expert, so I don't know all of the caveats and rules, but yes, there are specific restrictions on American flag vessels with regard to your hiring. And there are specific restrictions on foreign flag vessels as well. And one of the things that was happening when people, in our study, going back to the tax cap, in our study we determined that at an average retail price of $388,000, a buyer would seek alternative forms of registration in order to avoid tax liability in the state of Florida. He may go to a non-taxing state like Rhode Island, or a minimal taxing state like North Carolina, or he may go to Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Jamaica, Malta, wherever, and not be liable for state sales tax. But what that required him to do was to remove the vessel from the state of Florida within a specific period of time. We were the ones that lobbied the state to get a 90-day and then a 180-day deferral on that removal for a small fee, so the person could leave the boat here and have improvements and modifications made by the finest craftsmen in the world, in the boating capital of the world.
Yeah.
So we were able to accomplish that, but we recognized that there was an even better way, and that was to put a cap on the tax, so it encouraged the people to stay here. But that way they don't seek alternative forms of registration.
Very good. Awesome. Good job you guys are doing.
We're trying. We're trying.
So let's see. Which questions should I ask a broker when we meet for the first time to know if he or she is right for me?
It really depends upon what mission it is that you want that broker to accomplish. Um, your defined goals are something that you will know, and that's going to guide what question you would ask. If I'm a seller and I have a 65-foot Viking that I want to sell, then I'm going to ask that broker what knowledge he has of those types of boats, if I don't already have some sort of relationship with him. And quite often, people with bigger boats already have a relationship or a knowledge of a broker. But if it's someone that doesn't have a good bit of experience, or for some reason chooses not to, or has no choice but not to use a person he's done business with in the past, and he's forced to go find that new person, your level of experience in a certain type, brand of boat, what sort of, and I'm speaking from the listing or selling side of the boat, what sort of exposures would I be able to expect my vessel to have in the marketplace? What sort of presence do you have digitally, in print, at boat shows? How big a team do you have? What sort of marketing do you feel works best for this type of boat? And if I'm a buyer, I'm going to have a different set of questions. I'm going to be looking more towards a person who has specific experience in the arena in which I am interested. So I'm going to be looking for a person who is well versed in express style boats, or center console sport fishermen, or pilot house motor yachts, or tri-deck displacement exploration vessels, or whatever the specific need I have is. So it's very difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all question, because everyone has a different goal or end game in mind. But to all of this, the one thing that you have to do is, again, you have to listen to that little voice inside. We all have relationships in our lives, whether they're personal relationships or business relationships, and we listen to what that other person says, and we read their body language, and we look at the expression on their face, and we look at their eyes, and there are things that we know consciously and subconsciously as to whether a person's telling us the truth, or whether they're knowledgeable about a specific subject or not, or if they're faking it till they make it. So you got to trust your gut.
Yes.
You got to trust your gut.
Many times the personality is important, right?
Personality is extremely important. Another thing that's extremely helpful is a referral. If you have a friend or a colleague or someone whom you respect that has more experience in this realm than you do, talk to them and ask them if they can recommend someone.
Yes, that's right. Someone that has had a good experience with a broker that can tell you, I know this person, they do a good job, contact them. That's a good way to know that you're at least going somewhere, that someone knows.
Absolutely. And, like we spoke about earlier, whether you have the time to do all the research yourself or not, it does pay you to do some homework or some research. If you don't have any experience in the field, go online, Google the type of boat you're looking for, or Google the type of boat you have, and see who has those boats for sale, and see who speaks well about that type of boat, or who's well versed in that type of boat and makes a nice presentation. And you'll quickly ascertain who you feel comfortable with, or at least what path you want to take.
That's a very good idea. Looking at the listings, right? See who makes the nicest listings, who has the professional photos, who has the best descriptions, maybe,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All of those things are critically important, because at the end of the day, if you're selling your boat, you want to get it sold. Yeah. You want to sell it quickly, and you want to sell it for the best price possible. One of the other things that you'll realize when you're dealing with a professional is they're realists. They tend to be realists. It's quite often that people have an unrealistic view of the value of anything that they own in the marketplace, whether it's their car, their house, the watch they're wearing, whatever the case may be, their business. So to solicit the advice and guidance of a professional, you may not always hear what you want to hear, but more often than not, you're going to hear the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to work for a broker a long time ago, and people would come in and they would ask him, well, I want to sell my boat, what's it worth? And he would open up the multiple listing service and he would say, here's what they're selling for. Or excuse me, he'd say, here's what people are asking for those boats. And then he would pull up a proprietary system that we had access to, and he'd say, here's what they sell for.
Mm-hmm.
And those numbers were quite often very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
And we found over the years that many times a boat will be overpriced in a group. So there will be, pick any model of boat, and there may be 5 or 8 or 10 of them in the marketplace, and they've languished in the market for a long time, and you come to learn that they're overpriced as a group.
Yeah.
So John Q. Public goes online, he says, well, I've got one of those 45-foot Vikings, and he looks in there and they're all for sale for $329,000. My boat must be worth $329,000. But what he doesn't know is that all those boats have been for sale for 9 to 14 months. And the reason that they've been for sale that long is because the boat's really worth significantly less than that. So the professional broker can access sold boat data, which justifies the true market value. Just like doing a CMA or comparative market analysis in the real estate industry, a professional broker has the ability to do that for you in the yacht sales industry as well. So he can bring you real-time information as opposed to speaking to your dreams.
Yes, yes.
Time's
better
money.
to be prepared.
The longer you own the boat in this for sale process, the more money you're spending on something that you no longer want to own.
Yes, and it's better to know before you go into it, to know what to expect.
Have realistic expectations is critically important.
Yeah.
It's better for everyone. It's better for everyone. It may not be what you want to hear at first, but the facts are the facts.
And if you want it to get sold quickly, you need to price it right.
Well, we'll go right back to the fact that it costs you 10% of the value of that boat every year just to own it.
Exactly.
So if you have a $1.2 million boat, that's costing you $10,000 a month.
Yeah.
$10,000 a month. You want to sell it in 30 days? Do you want to sell it in 90 days?
Yeah.
Do you want to sell it in 9 months? Big difference in money.
Okay, Paul. Well, thank you so much for all this useful information.
It's my pleasure, Miriam. It's my pleasure.
And if anyone wants more information about Paul, you can visit iyba.yachts. That's the website, right?
We also now have the new website is iba.org, iyba.org. So we've reached the big leagues. We're professionals now.
Great.
We were fortunate enough to obtain that URL from a gentleman in California who had reserved it several years ago, and he recognized that for nonprofits that's the proper way to go, and he gave us off the URL. So we're at iba.org now as well.
Okay, that's very good.
Yeah.
So anyways, if you want to reach Paul, send him an email, ask him a question. His email is paul@iyba.org.
Correct.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.